The universal communication hub buzzed with nervous energy. Holographic displays flickered with urgent messages, casting an ethereal blue light across the faces of dozens of species gathered for the most critical diplomatic mission in recent galactic history. At the center of the massive circular chamber, a single human stood out, not because of any dramatic posture or loud proclamation, but due to an unsettling calm that seemed completely at odds with the situation. Dr. Elena Rodriguez adjusted the neural link on her communication band, her fingers moving with practiced precision. Around her, representatives from 17 different star-spanning civilizations muttered in a dozen translated languages. The mission briefing was not going well. The Krelchar, a species so notoriously aggressive that entire star systems maintained defensive quarantine zones around their territory, had issued a communication that was equal parts challenge and invitation. "We cannot send a traditional diplomatic team," announced Counselor Zrentak, a crystalline being whose translucent form shifted with agitated frequencies. "Every previous attempt at contact has resulted in complete destruction of the exploration vessels." His multifaceted eyes swept across the gathered representatives, challenging anyone to suggest otherwise. Most delegates avoided eye contact. The holographic displays behind Zrentak showed graphic evidence of previous encounters: shattered spacecraft, obliterated communication satellites, entire research stations reduced to cosmic dust. The Krelchar were not just dangerous, they were apocalyptically destructive. Elena's hand slowly rose. The chamber went silent. Zrentak's crystalline form flickered with what could only be described as exasperation. "Dr. Rodriguez, your reputation for unconventional research is well known. But this is not an academic exercise. This is about survival." She nodded, a slight smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "Precisely why I'm volunteering." Her recent research had been controversial within the scientific community. While other xenobiologists focused on technological analysis and defensive strategies, Elena had dedicated her career to understanding behavioral patterns across different intelligent species. Her latest published work, a comprehensive study on communication strategies in high-stress interspecies encounters, had been both celebrated and ridiculed. The holographic displays behind her shifted, showing snippets of her research. Complex behavioral graphs, audio-visual analysis of communication patterns, intricate diagrams showing subtle body language interpretations across multiple species. Where others saw chaos, Elena saw patterns. "The Kraljar communication isn't a threat," she said quietly. "It's a complex invitation we've been misinterpreting." Counselor Zrentak's form momentarily fractured, a sign of significant emotional response in his species. "Misinterpreting. They've destroyed entire research vessels. Entire scientific expeditions have been reduced to atomic debris." Elena's fingers danced across her communication interface, bringing up a series of detailed analysis charts. Each encounter follows a specific pattern. The violence isn't random. It's a form of communication we haven't understood. The other delegates leaned forward. Some looked intrigued. Others looked skeptical, but no one interrupted. "Their communication is multi-layered," she continued. "What appears to be an aggressive response is actually a sophisticated defensive mechanism. They're not attacking. They're responding to what they perceive as a threat." A murmur ran through the chamber. Challenging centuries of established understanding about the Kralchar was no small feat. Zrentak's crystalline form stabilized. "And you believe you can succeed where multiple advanced civilizations have failed?" Elena's smile was calm, confident. "Not just believe. I know." The chamber held its collective breath. The most dangerous diplomatic mission in galactic history was about to be entrusted to a single human scientist who claimed to understand something no one else could comprehend. And somewhere, in the vast darkness between stars, the Kralchar waited. The training facility looked nothing like a traditional diplomatic preparation center. Instead of sleek communication simulators and standard-issue diplomatic interfaces, Elena's preparation space resembled a chaotic blend of biological research lab and multimedia sensory chamber. Holographic displays flickered with complex data streams, while organic and synthetic models of various species stood frozen in carefully constructed poses. Dr. Marcos Oliveira, Alina's primary research assistant, watched with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You do realize no one believes this will work," he said, adjusting a molecular resonance translator that looked more like an art installation than scientific equipment. Alina didn't look up from her work. Her fingers moved across multiple holographic interfaces, analyzing micro-expressions, vocal modulations, and biochemical stress responses from hundreds of previous Kraljar encounter recordings. "Belief isn't scientific," she muttered. "Data is." The room itself was a testament to her unconventional approach, where most diplomatic preparation involved learning standardized communication protocols. Alina's method looked like a complex behavioral deconstruction. Entire walls were covered with intricate diagrams showing communication patterns across different species, not just verbal, but chemical, electrical, and vibrational. "The key isn't in understanding their language," Alina explained to Marcos, who had heard this lecture multiple times, but never tired of its brilliance. "It's in understanding their entire communication ecosystem." She pulled up a holographic representation of a Kraljar, a creature that defied simple biological classification. Part organic, part mechanical, the species existed in a state of constant adaptation. Traditional communication models simply failed to capture their complexity. "Look here," she pointed to a section of the hologram that pulsed with intricate energy patterns. "What other researchers saw as random aggression is actually a sophisticated threat assessment and communication mechanism." The simulation showed multiple encounter scenarios. In each one, the Kraljar's initial response appeared violent, but Alina's analysis revealed subtle patterns. Each attack followed a precise mathematical sequence. The movements weren't random. They were a complex language of survival and negotiation. Marcos watched as she manipulated the hologram, breaking down each movement into microscopic components. "You're treating them like a complex mathematical equation," he observed. "Exactly," Alina smiled. "Every interaction is a system. Most scientists look for simple inputs and outputs, but intelligent communication is never that straightforward." Her preparation involved multiple innovative approaches. She studied everything from predator-prey interactions on Earth to quantum entanglement communication theories. Traditional diplomatic training seemed laughably simplistic compared to her comprehensive approach. The Universal Exploration Court had initially resisted her methods, but after reviewing her extensive research and with no other viable options for Kraljar engagement, they had reluctantly granted her full access to their most advanced research facilities. A series of advanced neural interfaces allowed her to simulate potential communication scenarios. Each simulation ran thousands of potential interaction models, analyzing potential responses with machine-like precision and human intuition. "The Kraljar don't just communicate," Alina explained during one of her briefing sessions. "They negotiate survival through every interaction. What looks like aggression is actually an incredibly nuanced threat assessment and communication protocol." Her team had developed specialized equipment that could interpret multi-spectrum communication signals, sound, electromagnetic radiation, quantum-level vibrational frequencies. Nothing was off the table. Where traditional diplomats saw a potential threat, Alina saw an intricate language waiting to be understood. As the final preparation days counted down, a sense of nervous anticipation filled the research facility. Alina remained calm, her eyes constantly scanning data, her mind constantly processing potential scenarios. The most dangerous diplomatic mission in galactic history was about to begin, and humanity's hope rested on a scientist who saw communication as an art form, a mathematical equation, and a complex dance of survival. Somewhere, the Kraljar waited, unaware that everything was about to change. The starship's observation deck fell into absolute silence as the Kraljar vessel came into view. Nothing in years of scientific preparation could have prepared the crew for the sheer impossible complexity of the approaching entity. It wasn't a ship in any traditional sense, more a living, breathing ecosystem that defied every known principle of spacecraft design. Massive tendrils of biomechanical structures pulsed with an internal luminescence that seemed to breathe and shift. Quantum communication arrays rippled across its surface like living skin, creating patterns that hurt the human eye to observe directly. Alina stood perfectly still, her breathing measured, her neural interfaces humming with accumulated data from years of research. Incoming communication pattern, announced the ship's linguistic interface. Its mechanical voice carried a hint of uncertainty, an emotion no artificial system should possess. The communication wasn't sound. It wasn't light. It was something between. A quantum vibration that seemed to pass through the very structure of the ship. Most of the crew instinctively recoiled. Neural protection systems activated across the observation deck, creating a protective shimmer around the human representatives. Alina didn't move. Her fingers traced a complex pattern on her communication interface. To an outside observer, it might have looked like an abstract dance. In reality, she was translating the incoming quantum communication into a comprehensible pattern, her specialized neural interfaces working at speeds that pushed the boundaries of human cognitive capability. "They're not preparing to attack," she whispered. "They're assessing." The ship's military advisors tensed. Every previous encounter with the Kralchar had resulted in total destruction. Defensive systems charge, ready to react in milliseconds. Quantum shields flickered with anticipatory energy. A massive appendage, part organic, part mechanical, began to extend toward the observation deck. It moved with a grace that defied its enormous size. Sensors indicated it was several meters long, capable of crushing the entire observation deck with minimal effort. Metallic plates shifted like living muscle, sensory clusters pulsing with complex bioluminescent patterns. Most of the crew took an involuntary step backward. Alina stepped forward. Her communication interface translated the creature's approach. What looked like a threatening movement was actually an incredibly complex form of communication. Each shift of the massive appendage carried layers of information. Threat assessment, biological scanning, communication attempt. "It's asking permission," Alina said, her voice calm, not threatening. Asking. The ship's military advisor looked at her like she had lost her mind. Asking? "It's a massive weapon capable of." Alina raised her hand, silencing him. The Kralchar appendage stopped moving. Perfectly still, waiting. In that moment, something extraordinary happened. Alina's neural interface began translating not just the communication, but the emotional state behind it. Fear, curiosity, caution. The creature wasn't a mindless destroyer. It was a complex intelligence trying to understand. Her hand moved, almost of its own accord. Slow, deliberate. The neural interfaces adjusted, creating a communication field that translated her intention into a language beyond words. The massive appendage, capable of destroying entire planetary defenses, waited. And then she touched it. The universe seemed to hold its breath. Time seemed to fracture the moment Alina's hand made contact with the Kralchar sensory cluster. Every sensor on the ship went into overdrive, recording data at unprecedented rates. The communication interfaces began producing streams of information so complex that several computer systems momentarily crashed under the computational load. Dr. Marcos Oliveira watched from the secondary monitoring station, his hands frozen above the control panel. The holographic displays erupted with cascading data streams, biological readings, quantum communication patterns, electromagnetic resonances, all converging into a symphony of information that defied traditional scientific understanding. "What just happened?" whispered the ship's chief security officer, his voice a mixture of terror and awe. The Kralchar's massive appendage remained absolutely still, not frozen, but present, waiting. The sensory cluster where Alina's hand rested began to emit a low, resonant frequency that seemed to pass through the very structure of the ship. It wasn't sound. It wasn't light. It was something between. A communication that existed in layers of perception beyond human comprehension. Alina's neural interfaces worked at maximum capacity. Her body remained perfectly still, but her mind was processing an avalanche of information. The Kreljar wasn't just communicating. It was sharing memories, experiences, entire conceptual frameworks that human language could barely contain. Incredible, she murmured, her voice barely audible. They're not just intelligent. They're collaborative. The ship's communication systems struggled to translate. Fragments of meaning broke through. Concepts of survival, of complex social structures, of a civilization that viewed conflict as the absolute last possible response. What other species had seen as mindless aggression was actually an incredibly sophisticated survival mechanism. Marcos watched the biological readings with increasing fascination. Alina's neural patterns were changing, synchronizing with the quantum communication field generated by the Kreljar. It was as if two entirely different forms of intelligence were finding a common language, not through words, but through pure information exchange. Quantum entanglement, Marcos whispered to himself. She's creating a direct quantum communication link. The ship's defensive systems, primed for destruction, slowly began to power down. The military advisors looked on in stunned silence. Every previous encounter with the Kreljar had lasted mere milliseconds before resulting in total destruction. This was something entirely different. Minutes passed, or perhaps hours. Time seemed to lose meaning. When Alina finally withdrew her hand, the entire observation deck held its collective breath. Her eyes were different, wider, with a depth that suggested she had seen something profound. The Kreljar's appendage slowly retracted, leaving behind a sense of something. Not quite communication, not quite understanding. Something more. "We've been wrong," Alina said softly. Her voice carried the weight of a fundamental scientific revelation. Completely and totally wrong about everything. The quantum communication interface began translating her words, breaking them down into layers of meaning that went far beyond simple language. The Kreljar weren't a species of destruction. They were a species of profound communication, of survival through understanding. Marcos approached cautiously. "Alina, are you all right?" She turned, and her smile was something between scientific excitement and profound emotional revelation. "We're going to rewrite everything we know about interspecies communication." Outside the ship's observation deck, the universe seemed to pause, waiting to see what would happen next. The most dangerous diplomatic mission in galactic history had just become the most important scientific breakthrough of the century. The Universal Research Archives would later mark this moment as a turning point in galactic understanding. Alina's initial contact with the Kreljar generated more scientific data in 24 hours than the previous century of interspecies research combined. Research stations across multiple star systems began receiving data streams that challenged every fundamental assumption about communication, intelligence, and survival. Dr. Marcos Oliveira worked tirelessly, parsing through the quantum communication data. Each analysis revealed layers of complexity that left even the most advanced scientific minds struggling to comprehend. The Kreljar weren't just a species. They were a living, adaptive communication network that processed information in ways no one had previously imagined. "It's not just communication," Marcos explained during an emergency scientific conference. "It's a complete exchange of experiential knowledge. Every interaction is a complex negotiation of survival, understanding, and collective growth." Holographic displays across the conference hall showed fragmented insights from the encounter. Quantum communication patterns, biological resonance maps, and complex neural network simulations danced in three-dimensional space. Scientists from dozens of species leaned forward, their traditional barriers of species and discipline momentarily forgotten. The Universal Research Committee convened an emergency session. Representatives from 17 different civilizations gathered, their usual diplomatic tensions set aside in the face of this unprecedented scientific breakthrough. Alina's research data suggested something far more profound than a simple first contact scenario. The Kreljar have been misunderstood for centuries, Alina presented, her neural interfaces displaying complex data visualizations. What we interpreted as aggression was actually a sophisticated survival mechanism. They communicate through a multidimensional information exchange that goes beyond verbal or technological communication. Biological researchers noted something even more extraordinary. The Kraljar's communication method suggested a form of collective intelligence that transcended individual identity. Each encounter was a complex negotiation of survival, knowledge, and potential cooperation. Political implications began to emerge. Star systems that had maintained defensive quarantine zones around Kraljar territories started reassessing their long-standing policies. The creature that had been considered the most dangerous species in the known universe was now being viewed as a potential ally. Dr. Lydia Chen, a renowned xenobiological researcher, presented a groundbreaking analysis. "This isn't just a new way of communication," she explained. "This is a completely new understanding of intelligent life. The Kraljar don't just communicate, they integrate. Every interaction is a potential for mutual growth." The research revealed that the Kraljar's aggressive encounters were actually complex threat assessment and information-gathering processes. What seemed like destruction was actually a form of comprehensive environmental scanning. Each previous encounter had been an attempt to understand, not to destroy. Diplomatic channels began to recalibrate. The universal communication protocols developed over centuries suddenly seemed primitive and limited. Alina's breakthrough suggested that true understanding required more than language. It required a fundamental shift in perception. "We've been looking at communication all wrong," Alina told the assembled researchers. "It's not about translation. It's about connection." The Kraljar, once considered the most feared species in the galaxy, were now the subject of intense scientific curiosity. Research stations began developing new communication interfaces, hoping to understand the complex quantum communication methods Alina had first discovered. As the scientific community absorbed the implications, one thing became clear: everything was about to change. The universe had just become a much more complex, much more interconnected place. And it all started with a single touch. The research vessel entered a specially designated quantum observation zone, a region of space that defied traditional understanding of physical boundaries. Alina sat at the primary communication interface, her neural links pulsing with an intricate dance of quantum information that seemed to breathe with living complexity. Dr. Marcos Oliveira monitored the quantum communication patterns, his hands moving across interfaces that looked more like living organic networks than traditional computer systems. "The communication density is unprecedented," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "It's like we're witnessing the language of the universe itself." The Kraljar's communication method revealed a profound truth about survival and intelligence. What other species had interpreted as mindless aggression was actually an incredibly sophisticated method of environmental assessment and collective knowledge preservation. Their evolutionary history emerged through the quantum communication interface, a story of survival on a high-gravity world with extreme environmental challenges. The planet that birthed the Kraljar was a crucible of adaptation, where every interaction was a complex negotiation of survival. Their seemingly violent response to external stimuli was a refined mechanism of protection and information gathering. "They don't attack," Alina explained during a comprehensive briefing. "They assess. Every movement is a complex language of survival." The research team discovered that the Kraljar's biological structure was itself a communication network. Each biological mechanical component served multiple functions simultaneously: sensing, processing, communicating, protecting. Their entire existence was a continuous process of information exchange and adaptation. Quantum communication interfaces began to reveal layers of their social structure. It wasn't a hierarchy in any traditional sense, but a fluid, adaptive network where information and responsibility shifted based on environmental needs. Individual Kraljar were simultaneously unique and part of a collective consciousness that defied traditional understanding of individual identity. Imagine a society where every interaction is a complete exchange of knowledge, Marcos described during a scientific presentation, where protection, communication, and growth are the same fundamental process. The implications stretched far beyond the Kralchar. Their communication method suggested entirely new models of understanding intelligence, survival, and collective knowledge. Traditional concepts of individual identity began to look primitive and limited. Alina's neural interfaces continued to process the quantum communication streams. Each moment revealed new layers of complexity. The Kralchar weren't just communicating. They were constantly evolving, constantly assessing, constantly growing. Research stations across multiple star systems began developing new communication interfaces inspired by the Kralchar model. The traditional barriers between biological and technological intelligence started to blur. What was communication? What was survival? The lines became increasingly indistinct. "We've been looking at intelligence all wrong," Alina told a gathering of the most prominent researchers. "It's not about individual capability. It's about collective adaptation." The quantum communication patterns suggested something even more profound. The Kralchar's method of interaction was fundamentally different from any known form of communication. It wasn't about sending and receiving messages. It was about creating a shared experience of understanding. As the research vessel continued its observation, the universe seemed to pulse with a new kind of potential. The most feared species in the galaxy was now the key to understanding a completely new model of intelligence, and humanity had been the first to truly see them. The quantum interfaces hummed with possibility, a living testament to a universe far more complex and interconnected than anyone had ever imagined. The Universal Diplomatic Center looked different now. Where once rigid barriers and defensive protocols dominated, now there was an atmosphere of cautious curiosity. Alina's breakthrough with the Kralchar had transformed more than just scientific understanding. It had fundamentally reshaped how intelligent species viewed communication and cooperation. Diplomatic representatives from 17 different star systems gathered in a massive circular chamber. Holographic displays showed the intricate quantum communication patterns that had become the new standard of interspecies interaction. Each representative wore specialized neural interfaces, a testament to the new approach of comprehensive understanding. Counselor Rentak, the crystalline being who had initially opposed Alina's mission, now stood as her most vocal supporter. "We have been blind," he announced, his translucent form shifting with emphatic energy. "For centuries, we interpreted difference as threat. The Kralchar have shown us that communication is the truest form of survival." The technological exchanges began slowly. The Kralchar, once considered too dangerous for any meaningful interaction, now shared advanced scientific knowledge that had been locked away for generations. Quantum communication technologies, advanced environmental adaptation strategies, and complex survival algorithms began to flow between species. Research stations across multiple star systems worked to decode and understand the new communication models. What had once been separate scientific disciplines now merged into a comprehensive study of intelligent interaction. Xenobiologists worked alongside quantum physicists. Communication experts collaborated with evolutionary theorists. Alina's original research became the foundation of an entirely new scientific approach. The Rodriguez principle of comprehensive communication was now taught in academic institutions across the known universe. It suggested that intelligence was not about individual capability, but about collective adaptation and understanding. The most dramatic changes occurred in diplomatic protocols. Traditional defensive strategies gave way to more nuanced approaches of mutual understanding. Species that had maintained centuries of isolation began to open communication channels. The universe seemed to be breathing with new potential. "It's not about eliminating differences," Alina explained during a universal academic conference. "It's about understanding them. Every interaction is an opportunity for growth." The Kralchar's own society began to transform. Their centuries of isolation had been a complex survival mechanism that was no longer necessary. They began sharing their profound understanding of environmental adaptation, quantum communication, and collective intelligence. Technological exchanges revealed capabilities that seemed almost magical. The Krelljar's ability to process and integrate information was so advanced that it challenged fundamental understanding of intelligence. Their quantum communication methods suggested entire new models of processing and sharing knowledge. Political boundaries began to blur. Star systems that had maintained strict defensive perimeters for generations started to reconsider their isolation. The Universal Research Committee developed new communication protocols that emphasized understanding over defense. Dr. Marcos Oliveira presented a groundbreaking analysis of the long-term implications. "This is more than a scientific breakthrough," he told the assembled researchers. "This is an evolution of how intelligent life understands itself." The Universal Communication Network transformed. Where once there were barriers, now there were bridges. The most feared species in the galaxy had become its most profound teachers. Somewhere, in the vast darkness between stars, a new understanding was taking shape. Humanity had opened a door that could never be closed again, and it all began with a single touch of understanding. One standard galactic cycle after the initial encounter, Elena stood on the observation deck of the Universal Research Station. The vast expanse of space stretched before her, no longer a battlefield of potential conflicts, but a canvas of infinite possibilities. The quantum communication interfaces hummed softly, a living testament to the transformation that had begun with a single moment of unexpected connection. Dr. Marcos Oliveira approached, carrying 2 steaming cups of synthesized tea, a small ritual of humanity they had maintained through years of groundbreaking research. "Hard to believe how much has changed," he said, his voice carrying a mixture of wonder and scientific precision. The Universal Diplomatic Center had been completely redesigned. Where once there were defensive protocols and rigid communication barriers, now there were adaptive interfaces that prioritized mutual understanding. The Krelljar representatives moved through diplomatic corridors not as potential threats, but as collaborative partners. Elena's breakthrough had done more than establish communication with a single species. It had fundamentally altered how intelligent life understood itself. The quantum communication methods developed from her initial contact had become the standard for interspecies interaction. Universities across multiple star systems now taught comprehensive communication as a fundamental discipline. "We were so focused on our differences," Elena reflected, watching a group of multi-species researchers collaborate on a complex quantum communication project. "We never stopped to understand that communication is the most profound form of survival." The research had revealed something even more profound. Intelligence was not about individual capability, but about collective adaptation. The Krelljar's complex communication method was now understood as a sophisticated survival strategy, one that prioritized mutual understanding over conflict. Political boundaries had become more fluid. Star systems that had maintained centuries of isolation began to share knowledge, technologies, and cultural insights. The Universal Research Committee had developed communication protocols that emphasized comprehension over defense. A holographic display showed the current state of galactic interactions. Where once there were defensive zones and conflict regions, now there were collaborative research stations, shared technological development centers, and unprecedented cultural exchanges. It all started with a simple touch, Marcos mused, watching the display. One moment of genuine attempt to understand. The Krelljar had shared technologies that transformed multiple scientific disciplines. Quantum communication interfaces, advanced environmental adaptation strategies, and complex survival algorithms had revolutionized everything from medical research to planetary exploration. Elena's original research had become more than a scientific breakthrough. It was now a fundamental philosophy of interaction. The Rodriguez principle of comprehensive communication suggested that true intelligence was about adaptability, empathy, and the willingness to understand beyond initial perceptions. As the observation deck's lights dimmed, casting a soft glow across the research station, Elena reflected on the journey. Humanity had been seen as a young, somewhat naive species. Now they were recognized as innovative problem solvers who had fundamentally changed galactic understanding. The universe seemed to pulse with a new kind of potential. Barriers were dissolving. Understanding was expanding. And at the center of it all was a simple, profound truth. Communication was the most powerful force in existence. Marcos raised his cup of synthesized tea. "To understanding," he said. Elena smiled and touched her cup to his. "To connection." Outside the observation deck, stars continued their ancient dance, witnesses to a universe forever changed by a single moment of unexpected communication.